The Prime Minister has doubled housing costs by $500 billion of inflationary deficits, and by giving billions of dollars to local gatekeepers who block housing construction with the second slowest housing permits of any country in the entire OECD. Now, the deficits the Prime Minister is running risk increasing interest rates further and causing people to lose their homes to higher mortgage prices. Will the government introduce a balanced budget to bring down inflation and interest rates so that Canadians don't lose their homes?
Mr. Speaker, when it comes to the OECD, what the Leader of the Opposition should know and should be sharing with Canadians is that last week the OECD forecast that Canada would have the strongest economic growth in the G7 over 23 and 24. But what is truly appalling, Mr. Speaker, and frankly really disappointing, is that these Conservatives, at a time when forest fires have been raging across our country, would prefer to play partisan games rather than support our sensible measures to build the clean economy we desperately need.
The question was about the doubling of housing costs. This Prime Minister has brought in $500 billion of inflationary spending, which doubled rent costs, mortgage payments, and needed down payments for the average house. And now the IMF says that Canada is the country most at risk of a massive mortgage default, as our households have the most debt as a share of GDP of any country in the G7. That debt is about to collide with soaring interest rates driven by this government's deficits. Will they eliminate the deficits, balance the budgets to bring down inflation and interest rates before Canadians lose their homes?
Mr. Speaker, I'm glad to hear the Leader of the Opposition cite the IMF. And I hope that that means he is aware that it is the IMF which confirms that Canada has the lowest deficit in the G7 and the lowest debt-to-GDP ratio in the G7 by some measure. But, Mr. Speaker, I really have to point out to the Canadians listening to us the appalling behavior of this reckless and irresponsible opposition, which has been blocking sensible, important measures to support Canadians at a critical time.
It's not just homeowners, Mr. Speaker. Because this government has been giving billions to local gatekeepers who block affordable housing construction, and because their inflationary policies have doubled the rent, the students are now living in squalor. You used to be able to get an apartment, a full apartment, for $840 before this Prime Minister. Now, CBC is reporting that a student from Guelph has had to pay $840 just for a room in an apartment she shares with 6 other students that is mold and insect infested and doesn't even have running water. Will they reverse their inflationary policies so Canadians don't have